Hey everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We're going to be getting into our final chapter of Amoretta, so if you listened to this whole story all the way through, I truly thank you and hope you enjoyed. But as always, without further ado, let's get into a quick recap and then we'll get started. Last time, Jasmine found Ghost, who had been taken to Arnold's house. She gave the medicine to Colleen and also to Ghost, who was suffering from desert lung in secret. She explained that Ray learned of Ghost's true identity. Ghost went off to find Ray, but Jasmine rushed to stop him, calling the spirits to her aid. The two tangled with one another for a long period of time, before Ray finally revealed himself and made a pact with the spirits to kill Roy Sharp. When the pact failed, Ray was forced to face the truth, that Ghost was not Roy, but rather his brother Kenny, who had actually killed Roy all those years ago and left town. Ray returned to headquarters, where Phosphon leadership announced their intention to obliterate the town of Amoretta, and Ray ditched his former identity and committed to protecting the town. Chapter 5. One Summer's Night. Raoul, formerly Ray Fever, stormed out of his multi-story complex. Guards and contractors looked on in curiosity as he made his way purposefully down the stairs. Unseen to them, he was tailed by a contingent of spirits. One a red gerbil, walking upright. Another a neon green berry bush with bright purple flowers. Another a tie-dye minecart that seemed to roll along with creaking wheels. All of these were visible and audible to Raoul alone, as he made his way out of the sterile corporate office and out into the dry town of Amoretta. As he strode his way into the town, he looked back over his shoulder to see several fully formed storm clouds in the horizon, making their way towards him. He checked his watch for the time. It was nearly dusk. He clenched his teeth. "I'm going to get caught in this storm before I can get to town to warn Kenny," he said. He heard the recognizable sound of a bell ringing as the black and white ghostly bike brushed up against him. This was one of the first spirits he saw after changing his fate. He looked on it with a kind of familiarity he was unable to place. Suddenly he staggered backwards. This can't," he stammered. "How can you? You can't be." The bike simply rung its bell again in response as Raoul looked on terrified. After a moment, he let out a sigh and started to calm himself. "All right, then," he said. "Either way, you're exactly what I need right now." He got on the bike and started to pedal. To his surprise, nothing at first seemed to happen. Then, out of the blue, the bike suddenly took off, with the speed of a motorcycle as Raoul held on for dear life as he made his way towards the town of Amoretta. Meanwhile in town, Ghost and Jasmine dusted themselves off and looked around. A small crowd had formed in the distance to look on at them. Jasmine was breathing and sweating heavily, with a look of relief on her face. Ghost, for his part, was somewhat confused. He smiled as he saw a white feather duster spirit with a red handle come up to him and brush him clean. He grabbed it by the handle and dusted off a spot that Jasmine had missed, causing her to jump from the unseen entity. "Good grief, partner," she said, finally peeling the duct tape off her mouth. "You're gonna make my little old heart stop." Ghost chuckled. "I reckon you gotta have a bit of levity." She crossed her arms and stared daggers at him. "So, are you finished with your death wish you so desperately had a minute ago?" she asked. "Ray, or Raoul, didn't kill me, but I still see the spirits," he said. "It don't make much sense to me. If I wasn't fated to die there, where am I fated to die?" Jasmine paused and put her hand to her chin. "You said you've seen the spirits since your return, and you haven't been back to Amoretta since then?" "I reckon that's about right." "Then maybe isn't it possible you're only close to death in the sense that Kenny Fernandez is dead?" she asked. "Maybe the spirits see it more like an identity than a breath in a heartbeat." He said. "Shouldn't Raoul be able to see them as well, then? He killed his former identity, all the same as me." "Maybe he didn't," she said. "Maybe he don't consider himself as dead as he would have us think." As they discussed this, Wallace, the old saloon owner, ran up to them in a panic. "Come quick, do be slick," he said. "The old Ray Fever rang, and now the others want him to hang." Ghost turned to him. "English, please." "Floating like a witch he did. Crashed out in a ditch he did," Wallace said. "It don't matter what he's saying. Ray came back for some reason. The townsfolk are going to rip him limb from limb," Jasmine said. The two of them hurried off towards the old horseshoe saloon. Ghost noticed a rainbow of crows come and grab him by the arms to lift him into the air. Jasmine, unable to see them, simply groaned and whistled for some assistance. A mare with stars for eyes and a cloud pattern shaped into her bright blue skin came and knocked her off her feet as she grabbed onto the reins for dear life. The two made it to the saloon to see Raoul had crashed into the side of it. Ghost saw the spirit bicycle attempting to mend its fractures. Ray was surrounded by men with pickaxes. "Y'all got some nerve coming here without your security detail," one said. "Gonna give new meaning to the term back-breaking labor," another said. "Gonna give new meaning to having a fever," another said. The others all looked at the last one with a kind of bewilderment, but then they refocused their attention on Raoul, who was limping up to his feet. Jasmine ran over to stand between the men and Raoul. "Hey, stand down," she said. "You can't just brutalize someone because they wronged you, no matter how scummy they might be." She shot an angry glance back at Raoul. "We'll see about that. Get out of the way if you don't want to get it," a miner said. He swung his pickaxe back with all of his might. Ghost ran, trying to call out for a spirit towards them, but before he could, Raoul pulled a sword from the ground, formed entirely of glowing fireflies. He swung to counter the strike and broke the pickaxe in half. "Listen to me," Raoul said. "I'm not Ray Fever. That was a lie. I'm Raoul Fernandez. I grew up here. I was one of you at one point. I turned my back on this town and betrayed you all, and for that I'm deeply sorry. But we have to act quickly. Phosphon Corp is coming along with a battalion to wipe out the spirits and purge the mine." The miners looked towards each other with suspicion. Jasmine looked at Ghost with concern. The clouds had finally caught up with the town. A heavy cover of storm clouds covered the sun as the town started to go dark. The streetlights automatically sprung to life. "I promise on this sword of fireflies that what I say is truthful," Raoul said. With this, he plunged the firefly sword into himself. It drew no blood but stayed within him. Ghost's eyes widened and immediately ran over to him, pushing the miners out of the way. "Brother," Ghost said. "Yes, Kenny. I see them too," he said. "I've seen them since I committed to turn against Phosphon Corp." Kenny's eyes were filled with tears as he embraced his brother. Raoul hugged him back. "I always wanted you to live, Raoul. I wanted you to live a long, fulfilling life. And I failed you in that regard. I took the gift of life you gave me and squandered it, but I won't anymore." The miners stood back confused. Jasmine looked on with sympathy. Wallace finally caught up with the two, running as fast as he could without the aid of the spirits. Jasmine stepped out away from the two brothers. "Well, you heard the promise. Phosphon's on the way. Rally the townsfolk. We'll need to have a strong resistance if we want a chance at saving our home." "Our home?" a miner asked her. Jasmine got right up in his face. "That's right, our home. Or am I not Amoretta as much as you?" she asked. "'Cause as I recall, I was born here. You simply moved in with your gramps as a boy. I'm done acting with y'all like I gotta prove I belong here. I am here, and y'all don't have to like it, but y'all can't pretend I'm leaving anytime soon." The other two miners let out a little huff and smirk. They grabbed the other by the shoulder and went with Wallace to the saloon. Kenny and Raoul broke their hug and turned to her. Raoul cleared his throat just a bit. "They'll come in from the west. It's the only major road our trucks can get through," he said. "They'll have UV weapons, capable of harming the spirits, so we'll have to be careful about how we use them." The trio started walking towards the west of town, where Amoretta ended and the road towards Phosphon Complex led. The rain started to come down now, and the rumblings of thunder could be heard in the distance. They stood there a bit, Kenny and Raoul inventorying the various spirits. Jasmine kept her eyes out, but turned when she felt something bump against her leg. The spirit bike had bumped up against her and rung its bell, getting Raoul and Kenny's attention. Kenny raised his eyebrows. "Ain't that?" he asked. "I think so. If not, one hell of a coincidence." "Huh. What the hell are both you dead men talking about?" Jasmine asked. "Sick of this not being able to see spirits thing." "Why don't you just promise to see them?" Raoul asked. "You could end up like Kenny and me." "Did you just ask me to die, you old coot?" "Old coot? I'm younger than him," he said, gesturing to Kenny. As they bickered, a voice could barely be heard over the rain and thunder calling out to them. The three turned their attention to see Arnold running out towards them. "Someone come quick," he said. "The sheriff's still at it, and he's holding Wallace at gunpoint, saying he won't let him go until the three of you are back here." Kenny and Raoul looked shocked. Jasmine just started towards the saloon. "Leave it to me," she said. "You take care of these guys. I won't let that nasty bootlicker lay a finger on anyone." "Jasmine, wait," Kenny said. She stopped. He walked over to her. He gripped her with a big hug, which caused her to look shocked. He let her go, and then he took his hat off and pushed it on her head. "Good outlaw needs a good hat," he said. "Thank you for everything you did to set me and my brother right." Raoul walked over as well. Jasmine pouted with an agitated expression. "Don't talk like that," she said. "Promise me that you're both not going anywhere. Spirits be damned." She stuck out her pinky. Kenny hesitated, but Raoul quickly put it in with hers. I promise. Kenny's face softened. He let out a sigh and put his pinky in with theirs. I'll promise too. The wind stirred so strongly that the clouds parted for just a small window of moonlight to be able to shine down on the three of them. They all stood, looking at each other, completely drenched. Jasmine laughed. Kenny and Raoul were unable to help but let out a little chuckle as well. The clouds closed back up, and the three hugged each other. Jasmine then started on her way, carefully finding out where the handles and seat of the ghost bike were, and then taking off, though slightly more carefully than Raoul had. Arnold took off in a sprint after her, not realizing how fast she was going to move. What do you think the spirits do when you make a promise you can't keep? Raoul asked. I reckon I don't know what you mean, Kenny said. We said we weren't going anywhere. I have no intention of leaving this town, even if it kills me. Headlights of armored trucks began appearing in the distance. The rain came down even harder now. Flashes of lightning were the only light visible to the average eye. However, several of the spirits who huddled around the brothers emitted their own light. Raoul stepped forward towards the trucks as they approached the town. He closed his eyes. All at once, several spirits darted off in various directions. A few of them, bats with silver feathers instead of fur, smashed into windows, grabbing large shards of glass in a hurry to go scatter them over the road. Two large ethereal statues grabbed shrapnel and chunks of decayed or demolished buildings. They bent the steel beams and carved them into spikes, and then thrust them into the ground in the path of the vehicles. Raoul stepped forward and drew a line in the sand just before the town started. Then a giant steampunk tire spun out, creating a ditch. Kenny looked on in awe. How do you command the spirits without even calling out a promise? He asked. I told you, he said. I promised myself things. Now I promise I'm going to do the right thing for this town. A real promise isn't spoken. It's written on your heart. Kenny chuckled. I don't recall you being so corny. Raoul smiled. He reached into the ground and pulled up a glowing ear of corn. That's funny, because I recall you being that way. He swung his arm back and threw the corn towards the back of the convoy vehicles. It soared over them and landed right in the middle. It created a disruption in gravity that flipped about 4 of the vehicles upside down, but leaving the people inside unharmed. Raoul looked over to Kenny. By the way, I get the sense that the spirits won't let you kill people. Is that right? That's correct, he said. Raoul nodded. I think that's for the better. Killing someone, even in self-defense, seemed to be the cause of all of this. We have the power to do this without that. The first of the trucks hit the shards of glass and spikes and spun out upon hitting the ditch and crashed. The remaining 4 vehicles easily made it over. A man popped out from the hood and turned on a cannon of light, which caused the spirits moving to squirm and scatter. 2 men leaned from the windows and started opening fire on Kenny and Raoul. The 2 ducked to the side of a building to hide behind it. We're going to have to dim those lights if the spirits are going to help us out. Not necessarily, Kenny said. He saw a barrel full of dark ale to the right of them. He cracked open the lid. He whistled and 2 rabbit spirits, one blue, one pink, jumped into the barrel. He peeked around the corner, narrowly pulling back before a volley of bullets went his way. He used his lasso to swing the barrel around to launch it hurtling towards the truck. The gunmen were unable to respond to it fast enough, and it got under the vehicle. Then the barrel exploded into several hundred multicolored rabbits, tipping the vehicle over and disconnecting the UV cannon from its power source. Way to go, brother, Raoul said. Kenny turned, smiling, but his smile vanished as he saw a Phosphon operative come around the corner with a gun pointed. Get down! Kenny lunged to push his brother down, but the gunman fired into Kenny's chest in the process. Kenny struck the gunman, knocking the gun out of his hand. The assailant then pulled out a knife. Raoul grabbed his watch from his wrist, and a spirit in the form of green stringy twine came over and latched onto it. Raoul grabbed the twine spirit from one end and started to let the watch oscillate in front of the operative. I promise you, you're getting very sleepy, he said. The Phosphon operative staggered a bit before collapsing and falling asleep. Kenny got back up to his feet. A fire sprite came over to him and he plunged it into his chest to cauterize the wound. He let out a yelp of pain when he did this. They turned back to see a cohort of rock spirits flipping another one of the vehicles over as it tried to advance into the town. However, another UV cannon lit up, causing them to burn up. Kenny slid out from cover and launched a handful of paintballs at the cannon, causing its line of fire to be slightly obscured, allowing the golems to roll out of harm's way. Back at the saloon, Jasmine hopped off the bike and slammed through the doors. She landed her first step so that her boot landed perfectly and the creakiest floorboard sound rang out. The whole saloon, which was in a circle around the sheriff, looked over towards her as she strode into the place with Ghost's hat on her head. The sheriff let out a guttural sound. Not another step, outlaw, he said, or your boss gets it. She smiled. Outlaw? Well, it looks like I finally made it. Don't be so smiley, missy, he said. And keep your trap shut, too. I know those spirits are at your beck and call. She shook her head. What are you doing, Sheriff? Why are you selling out our town to Phosphon? He laughed. Selling out? Girl, look around you. This town is dying. Has been for decades. The last nail has been near the coffin for some time now. Phosphon's just driving it through. There will be nothing left here for us soon enough. They're offering me a way out. She tilted her head and frowned. Arnold stumbled through the door, still carefully avoiding the creaky floorboard. Well, I reckon I don't agree. I think if we band together and look forward, we can make this town have quite a happy future, she said. Arnold, the Irish ale, please, if you will. Arnold, don't you move a muscle either, he said. No more weird spirit tricks. I can't wait to leave here and be away from those little devils once and for all. Jasmine rolled her eyes. Damn it, Sheriff, I'm thirsty. And there's no tricks to the spirits. You could use them too if you wanted. Just make a promise. Stop that right now. He pushed the gun into Wallace's head where it was visible that it was pushing into him. Golly, please don't shoot. That wouldn't be a hoot, Wallace said. Here's what you're going to do, the sheriff said. You're going to grab that there knife and gouge your eyes out. And then you promise to let Wallace go? She asked. A rustle of wind picked up. Don't say that word. Jasmine stood very still as the sheriff's hand trembled, finger close to the trigger. She was breathing a little heavily. Her sweating was only masked by how drenched she was from the rain. The miners all looked ready to lunge at the sheriff if they saw an opportunity, but he had his eyes trained on all of them. I'm not doing anything, she said. I just need a reassurance that you won't hurt anyone. The sheriff growled. I'm not taking orders from you. All I want to do is be able to get out of this dying corpse of a town as soon as possible. Is that really true, Sheriff? She asked, carefully biting her lip. Yes, it's true. I'm going to leave this town and never come back. She shook her head, smiled, and then put her hands on her hips. I don't think you will. You lousy brat. I swear I will get out of this town no matter what, he said. Maybe you need to be reminded of how serious this is. His finger grazed the trigger. Okay, Jasmine said. She picked up the knife and moved it towards her eye. She stopped just before getting there. Just one thing, though, she said. One quick question before I blind myself. Make it quick. How would you explain swearing an oath to a child? She asked. Like to Colleen, how might you explain it? What the hell kind of question is that? Just answer it so I can stab my eyes out. Swearing an oath is kind of like making a promise. If you swear to do something, you're promising to do it. Jasmine let out a sigh of relief. So, when you swore to leave here, that was a promise? She asked. The sheriff's eyes widened as he went to pull the trigger, but before he could, white insects, invisible to all of them, jumped up from the floorboards and started to drag him out of the saloon and out of the town. Jasmine and the others went outside to watch as the sheriff was dragged through the mud and out of Amoretta once and for all. The miners all cheered and lifted up Jasmine into the air and tossed her up and down. Settle down, she said. It ain't over yet. We gotta get to the west to help the Fernandez brothers. Back at the entrance of town, the brothers pulled on Kenny's lasso with all their might, trying to keep the UV cannon from being able to change its direction. The two stone statues lifted up the truck from behind and flipped it, with Kenny and Rule having to roll out of the way. With that, the last of the trucks had been flipped over. However, as they caught their breath, Raoul took 2 bullets, one in each leg, and he collapsed to the ground. Kenny called forth a vibrant green snake spirit to use as a new lasso and whipped the gun from his hand. He then lunged towards the assailant. He brought the snake's head towards the man's neck and lunged it in, the fangs filled with tranquilizer instead of venom. The man quickly collapsed to the ground. 2 more men emerged from the flipped vehicles and pointed their weapons. A sudden gust of wind pushed Kenny in front of Raoul, where he stood with his arms outstretched. The bullets plunged into him, but never went through to the other side, keeping Raoul from any harm. Gonna have to go through me to do that, Kenny said, as he coughed up blood. The men approached closer as Kenny leaned over and continued to cough up massive amounts of blood. Then suddenly, the blood pooled into 2 blobs and lunged up at the men's helmets, completely obscuring their vision. Raoul stood up and grabbed the snake from Kenny's hands, leaving them completely incapacitated. Raoul went over to help Kenny, but suddenly got a bullet in his neck from one last man getting out of his vehicle. He staggered, blood spilling out of his neck. He snapped his fingers, though, and the ground around the car briefly turned into quicksand, taking the vehicle in just enough so that he could not fire at them anymore. Raoul stumbled to the ground near where Kenny was down. The blood from his chest was pooling out, and he looked on the verge of losing consciousness. Raoul desperately tried to speak, but nothing happened but garbling over his own words. Kenny grabbed him by the wrist. "Please," he said. "Please try to relax. Don't try to speak." A golden sheet spirit wrapped itself around Raoul's neck to briefly stop the bleeding, but most of the damage was done as Raoul collapsed to his hands and feet near his brother. Kenny was breathing heavily, feeling at the end of his rope as well. The 4 remaining Phosphon operatives managed to flip a vehicle in the ditch and hook up the UV cannon back to it. They got in and started to drive towards Amoretta, callously rotating the cannon around, harming every spirit nearby they could hit. "Those bastards," Kenny said. Raoul rose back up to his feet, barely able to keep his balance. He extended his hand to help Kenny up as well. The truck was barreling right towards them. The two looked at each other, both with a smile and tears in their eyes, as they braced each other one last time. "Raoul, you were the best little brother I could ever ask for," he said. "I'm sorry I couldn't have been a better, older one." An ethereal parrot flew onto Raoul's shoulder. It spoke for him. "Don't be a fool, brother. You did everything you could. I only wish I could have been better. At least in the end, we got to do the right thing." As they held tight, they jumped, assisted by a push from an unseen spirit under the ground. Their bodies connected directly with the UV cannon mounted on the truck, damaging it and scattering the glass. The brothers collapsed right next to each other as they went flying. The clouds started to fade and the storm started to subside, as quickly as it came. The men emerged from their vehicles with their guns drawn on the collapsed men. However, one by one, they began to feel a thrusting force into their sides, as they got pushed and knocked down by an unseen spirit. The charge got more and more aggressive, and without any remaining UV weapons, the men had no choice but to run off as the spirits attacked them. Raoul and Kenny smiled as the bike spirit protected them from their assailants. Kenny, with a great pained grunt, rolled over to look his brother in the eyes. Raoul smiled, blinking a bit, before his last blink turned into his eyes closing forever. Kenny's eyes followed suit, and soon the two lay there, their bodies limp in the dim light of the moon. Jasmine ran over, ahead of the others from the town who arrived at the scene, and she immediately slid to her knees at their bodies. She shook both of them. "Kenny, Raoul," she said frantically. "Kenny, Raoul, no, come on. You promised me. You promised you wouldn't leave me." She checked their pulses and felt nothing. She collapsed her head into her hands as she cried over both of their bodies. She sobbed uncontrollably. After a few moments, some invisible motion was occurring in the mud near their bodies. Jasmine looked up to see 2 spirits covering themselves in mud. One had its shape revealed as a toy truck. The other one had the familiar shape of a cowboy hat. Jasmine looked confused, but suddenly a flicker of revelation appeared on her face. She hugged both the spirits tightly. "You guys," she said, sobbing. "That's not exactly what I meant. But I guess it's better than nothing." Something in the dirt appeared to approach. It was a disturbance in the mud, like a bike had pedaled its way up to the 3 of them. Jasmine looked on in curiosity. The cowboy hat and truck made their way over and seemed to bump into the bike spirit playfully. "I reckon you guys know this one then," she said. "Huh. I never knew that's where the spirits came from, but it makes a lot of sense." She continued to hug the spirits tightly. The miners who had come over began to start to clean up some of the rubble caused by the clash. Wallace spoke with a few of them from a distance, and then he walked up to Jasmine and put his hand on her shoulder. "They died like heroes," Wallace said. "We all owe them a great debt." "We owe it to them to keep this town alive," Jasmine said. "That's what they would have wanted." Wallace smiled. "I'm glad you say that, because the folks and I, we've been walking and talking. They want me to be the new sheriff. It's quite a big duty, and I'm going to need a deputy." He pointed at Jasmine. She chuckled. "You want to have an outlaw as a deputy, Wallace? But who's going to take over the saloon?" "Well, I reckon that'd be a great opportunity for Arnold to cut him some slack. That way he won't do any more damage to his back," he said. "And I know for certain he won't fail, because it's something I got in the mail." Jasmine looked perplexed. "What'd you get in the mail?" she asked. "A letter that made me giddy as a casting call actor. The saloon's getting a lot of money from a mysterious benefactor." "Mysterious benefactor? Someone's giving money to the old saloon? I wonder why." "Not just the saloon, but all around. This man wants to pour some money to reinvigorate the whole town," Wallace said. Jasmine stared at him. Her eyes widened. A flicker of realization lit up her face. "This man says he's moving here. He apologizes if this makes things odder. But it took him way too long to make his fortune, and he really wants to meet his daughter." Jasmine dropped to her knees in shock. She felt something brush against her. She could feel the two spirits resting on each of her shoulders, giving her reassurance. She smiled and readjusted her hat to put it more firmly on her head. She stood herself back up and stretched her hand out to Wallace. Well, that's fine by me. We're going to need all the help we can get rebuilding this town and keeping it safe from Phosphon, she said. Wallace, let's promise to be the best sheriff and deputy this town has ever seen, and protect it till our last breaths. Wallace took her hand and shook it. The hat spirit, the toy truck spirit, and the bike spirit all whisked around them, creating a swirl of wind as they sealed the promise. Jasmine looked up into the bright moon as it washed over the town. The ghostly outlaw and the corporate renegade, separated as children and reunited again, had forever changed the course of this town. Their outlaw attitude, their propensity for kindness over violence in the moments it mattered most, would never soon be forgotten. I just wanted to thank you again for listening to the story of Amoretta. I really loved putting this one together. It filled me with a lot of nostalgia thinking about some of the pieces that inspired it. Next week, like last time we ended the series, there's not going to be a full episode. Instead, there's going to be another teaser trailer for the next project. Without giving too much away, it's a story about a woman who enters a popular televised baking competition, only to find out that she's inadvertently put her own life on the line when the dark truth about this wholesome reality TV show is revealed to her. It's a mix of dark comedy and horror thriller, and I hope you tune in next week to learn more about it. As always, I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again. Amoretta is a D2 Stories production. You can stay up to date with Amoretta and all future D2 Stories productions by finding us on social media. That'll be D2 Stories across just about any of the big platforms.